My family kicked me out for refusing to give my brother $37,000. I worked 4 years saving while he did nothing. But when I legally protected my money and moved out alone, my parents never expected I'd build my life without them. I'm 19 years old, studying at university and working part-time at a coffee shop. And I need to tell this story because basically, my family kicked me out of the house about 2 months ago for not giving my savings to my older brother. And there are still days when I wonder if I did the right thing. Although deep down, I know I did. The thing is, I've been saving since I was 15. I mean, 4 complete years working at whatever I could to save money and start my own business someday, and I managed to save $37,000, which I know isn't a fortune, but for me it was everything. It was my future, you know what I mean? And it turns out my parents decided that money wasn't really mine, that I should give it to my brother Zachary so he could move into an apartment he can't even afford. But well, I guess I should start from the beginning, so this makes sense. I started working when I was 15, first mowing lawns in the neighborhood on weekends, then I got a job at a convenience store after school, and basically any job I could do while still studying. My parents never gave me money for anything. Honestly, they always said I had to learn to fend for myself. That money doesn't grow on trees and all those things parents say, you know, and I was okay with that. Like, I understood I should be responsible and all that. What I didn't understand was why my brother Zachary, who's 24 years old, never had to do any of that. He was always the golden child, for as long as I can remember. And it's not like I'm exaggerating or anything. Literally everyone in the family noticed it. When I got good grades, it was like, oh, that's nice. But when Zachary did the bare minimum, my parents treated him like he'd won the Nobel Prize or something. Zachary dropped out of college after his second year, I think, or maybe it was earlier. I don't remember exactly. But the point is that, since then, he hasn't really worked. He's had like 3 or 4 jobs that lasted a month each at most, and he always has an excuse for why he got fired or why he quit, that the boss was mean, that the schedule didn't work for him, that the job was too far away. Basically, it's never his fault. And my parents always defended him, said he was looking for the right job, that he shouldn't settle for just anything, that he was smart and deserved something better. Meanwhile, I was working 30 hours a week, on top of studying full-time, and nobody told me I deserved something better, honestly. Every dollar I earned, I saved in a savings account I opened when I turned 16, and my parents knew I was saving, but I never told them exactly what for, just that I wanted to have money for the future. The reality is, I always wanted to have my own business, like a coffee shop or an organic products store, something like that. I didn't have it all planned out, but I knew I wanted to be my own boss someday and not depend on anyone. I lived super frugally during those 4 years. Seriously, my friends would go out to eat and I'd to bring my lunch from home. When everyone went on vacation, I stayed working. I didn't buy new clothes unless it was absolutely necessary, and every extra cent went straight into my savings account. I had reached $37,000 and was super proud of myself. Honestly, because it had been difficult and required a lot of discipline. So, like 3 months ago, maybe 2.5 months ago, Zachary came home all excited saying he'd found the perfect apartment. He was still living with my parents, obviously, because he'd never had money to move out and hadn't really shown much interest in doing so until that moment. But apparently he'd seen this apartment in a really nice area of the city, like a new building with a gym and pool and all those things, and he was convinced that was the place where he should live. The problem, and I found this out later, was that the apartment cost like $1,500 a month, and they were asking for a security deposit equivalent to 3 months' rent. So like $4,500 plus the first month. So we're talking about him needing like $6,000 just to move in, not counting furniture or any of that. And Zachary didn't even have $500 in his account, I'm sure, because he's never saved anything in his life. My parents were talking with him for several days about that apartment. I heard them but wasn't paying much attention because I thought it was their problem. You know? Like, if they want to give Zachary money, go ahead, but that had nothing to do with me. Or so I thought. One night, it was a Thursday, I think, I came home from work around 9 at night, dead tired because it had been a super long day, and my parents told me we needed to sit down and talk, that it was important. I thought maybe they were going to tell me they were getting divorced or something dramatic like that. I don't know why, but I never imagined what was coming. They sat down in front of me in the living room, both with super serious faces, and my dad started talking. He told me they knew. I'd been saving money for years, and that they were proud of my work ethic and all that, but that the time had come for me to help the family. I didn't understand anything. Like, help the family, how? And then my mom dropped the bomb. She told me Zachary needed money to move into his new apartment, and that since I had savings, the right thing to do was for me to give the money to my brother. I sat there in shock, trying to process what they'd just said, and the first thing I thought was, this has to be a joke, right? But no, they were completely serious. I asked them how much money they wanted me to give Zachary, thinking maybe they were talking about a few $100s or something, and my dad said, well, the apartment costs this and basically we're talking about you needing to give him like $37,000. I froze. I mean, I literally felt my heart stop. I told them they were crazy, that money was mine, that I'd worked 4 years to save it and that I had plans for that money, that I wanted to start a business someday. My mom interrupted me and told me I was young, that I had plenty of time to save again, but that Zachary needed the money now, that he was already 24 and needed to become independent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Seriously, it was like being in a nightmare. I explained to them that it didn't make sense for me to give all my money to Zachary, that he'd never worked like I had, that it wasn't fair for them to ask me that. My dad started getting angry and told me that family helps each other. That's what families do, and that I was being selfish by only thinking about myself. Selfish. Me, who had worked like a slave for 4 years while my brother did nothing, was the selfish one. The argument got more and more tense, and in the end, my dad told me I had a week to think about it, but that they expected me to do the right thing. I got up and went to my room without saying anything else, because I knew if I kept talking, I was going to explode. That week was horrible, like one of the worst of my life. Every day, my parents pressured me. My mom would come to my room and say things like, "Are you really going to let your brother miss the opportunity of his life over money?" Or, "I thought we'd raised you better. I thought you were more generous." Zachary also started getting involved, sending me messages saying he'd always known I was selfish, that I'd never cared about the family, that he'd always been there for me, which was a total lie, and that now that he needed me, I was turning my back on him. They even tried the approach of, well, you don't have to give him everything, you can give him half or 2/3 or whatever amount seems fair to you. But I knew that if I gave in even a little, they were going to keep pushing until they got everything. I talked to my best friend about the situation, told him everything, and he couldn't believe what they were doing to me. He said, if I needed a place to stay, his family could take me in for a while, and that gave me a little peace of mind because I knew I had options if things got worse. I also looked for information online and found that many people had gone through similar situations with their families, and most of the advice said I shouldn't give in, that my money was mine and that if I gave in now, it would never end. They would always come back asking for more. The week passed and the moment of truth arrived. It was Sunday afternoon and my parents called me to the living room again. This time Zachary was also there, sitting with his arms crossed and an angry face. My dad asked me if I'd made a decision and I told them yes, that my decision was not to give Zachary the money. Immediate chaos broke out. My mom started crying, which he hated because it felt like pure manipulation. Zachary started yelling at me that I was an asshole, and my dad turned red with anger. He told me that if that was my final decision, then I had to leave the house, that while I lived under his roof, I had to contribute to the family, and if I wasn't willing to do that, then I wasn't welcome there. I'm not going to lie. It hurt a lot to hear that, because no matter how many problems we had, they were still my parents, you know? But at the same time, I felt enormous rage because it was all so unfair. I told them it was fine, that I was going to leave, and my dad told me I had until the end of the day to pack my things and get out. I went up to my room shaking. I don't know if from rage or fear or both, and started packing. I had 3 large suitcases, and I put in all my clothes, my important documents, my laptop, basically everything that was mine, and fit in those suitcases. Some things I had to leave, like books and some posters and things like that, but I took all the essentials. I called my friend and told him I needed that place to stay he'd offered me, and he told me to come to his house immediately. I went downstairs with my suitcases. My parents were in the a living room watching me. My mom was still crying and my dad had a stone face, and Zachary said something like, "I hope it's worth it, idiot." I didn't say anything to them, just walked out the door and left. I took an Uber to my friend's house because I didn't have my own car, and the whole way I was like on autopilot, not really processing what had just happened. My friend's parents were super kind to me, told me I could stay as long as I needed and not to worry about paying rent or anything, just to concentrate on school and work. I stayed there for about 2 weeks, sleeping on the living room couch, and although they were being incredibly generous, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to find my own place. During those days, I kept working normally, went to classes, tried to maintain my routine, but inside, I was a mess, honestly. One night, like a week after leaving home, Zachary sent me a long message full of insults. He said that because of me, he'd lost the apartment of his dreams, that the owner had already rented it to someone else because he couldn't get the deposit money in time, that I'd ruined his life and he would never forgive me, that he hoped everything went badly for me. He also said my parents were devastated, that my mom wouldn't stop crying and my dad was super stressed, and that it was all my fault for being selfish and only thinking about myself. I read it like 3 times because I couldn't believe the level of lack of self-awareness he had. Like, he'd never worked a day in his life, expected me to give him 4 years of my work, and I was the selfish one. I didn't respond, just blocked his number. I decided I needed legal protection for my money because I was afraid my parents might try something weird. I don't know. Like trying to access my account or something. I looked for a lawyer who gave free consultations for students at the university and went to talk to him. I told him the whole situation, and he told me that since I was of legal age and the money was in my account in my name, legally it was completely mine and nobody could touch it without my permission. He recommended I make sure my bank account didn't have either of my parents as co-holders. He didn't, fortunately, and that I change all my passwords and security questions. He also told me to consider opening an account at a different bank just to be safer, and I did that. I moved all my money to a new bank and made sure all the contact information was my email and my cell phone number, not my parents'. I started looking for apartments and better paying jobs at the same time. I found a job at a restaurant that paid better than the coffee shop, with tips and everything, and although the schedule was more demanding, I needed the extra money. I also found a small studio near campus that was within my budget. If I combined the income from my new job with some freelance hours, I started doing online. The apartment was tiny, like 30 square meters or something, but it had the basics: small kitchen, bathroom, a space that worked as living room and bedroom at the same time, and that was all I needed. I moved into the studio about a month after leaving my parents' house, and it was weird being completely alone for the first time in my life, but I also felt a strange freedom, you know? Like, it was my space, my rules. Nobody was pressuring or manipulating me or anything. I bought basic furniture at IKEA and secondhand stores: a bed, a desk, some plates and pots, basically the minimum to survive, because I was still being super careful with my money. My savings had gone down a bit because of the apartment deposit and the furniture, but I still had most of it intact. About 3 weeks after being in my new apartment, my mom started sending me messages. At first they were super dramatic, saying they missed me, that the house felt empty without me, that please come back home and we could forget everything that had happened. I didn't respond. Then, the messages changed tone, got more manipulative. Things like, "Your grandmother asks about you and is sad you don't come visit her," or, "Are you really going to destroy this family over money?" I didn't respond either. Then my dad also started sending messages, shorter and more direct, saying we needed to talk like adults, that we couldn't continue like this. Zachary, for his part, kept trying to contact me from different numbers because I'd blocked his, sending messages that alternated between insults and pleas. One day I ran into a family friend at the supermarket, a lady who'd known my parents for years, and she stopped me to talk. She told me she'd heard I'd left home and that my parents were telling a very different version of the facts. According to them, I had abandoned them for no reason, had become rebellious and selfish, and had broken their hearts. They were saying I'd refused to help the family in a time of need and had chosen money over them. They didn't mention at all that they demanded I give them my 4 years of savings or that they'd kicked me out of the house. This lady, who fortunately knew me well, told me she didn't believe my parents' version but wanted to hear my side of the story. I told her everything quickly right there in the supermarket aisle, and she shook her head and told me she was so sorry that she couldn't believe my parents had done that. That conversation made me realize my parents were probably talking badly about me with all the family and their friends, and that hurt but also made me really angry. I considered sending a mass message telling my version of the facts, but in the end I decided it wasn't worth it. That people who really knew me would know the truth, and the rest didn't matter. Besides, starting a war of narratives was going to be exhausting and wasn't going to change anything. About 2 months passed since I left home, and life started to stabilize a bit. I was doing well in school. The restaurant job was demanding, but I was making good money, and my apartment was starting to feel like my home. I was still sad about the situation with my family, obviously, but I also felt I'd made the right decision. One night, my dad called me from an unknown number, and I answered without realizing who it was. He told me we needed to talk, that this had gone too far and it was time to fix it. I asked him if they were willing to apologize and stop asking for my money. And there was a long silence before he said, it wasn't about apologies, it was about being family. I told him that for me being family didn't mean I had to sacrifice my future for Zachary, and that if that was his definition of family, then we fundamentally disagreed. He hung up without saying anything else. After that call, I made the decision to permanently block my parents' and Zachary's numbers. I know it sounds drastic, and believe me, it wasn't easy, but every time I talked to them or saw their messages, I felt worse, and I needed peace of mind to concentrate on building my life. I also started going to therapy at the University Health Center because I realized I needed to process all this with someone neutral who could help me. Now, about 3 months after all this, I'm in a better place. I'm still living in my studio, working and studying, and my savings are safe. I picked up my business plans again and started taking online courses on entrepreneurship and business administration. I'm not going to lie and say I don't think about my family, because I do, especially at night when everything's quiet and there are no distractions. I wonder if Zachary finally got a job, if my parents are okay, if at some point they'll understand why I did what I did. Last week, my friend asked me if I'd ever consider reconciling with my family, and I told him I didn't know. I guess if at some point they recognize that what they asked of me was unfair, and truly apologize, we could try to rebuild something, but that would require them to take the first step, and I don't know if that's ever going to happen. For now, I'm focused on myself, on my future, on not letting this define me, even though it's been incredibly difficult. I'm going to use that money for what I always wanted to use it for, to start my business when I'm ready, and nobody's going to make me feel guilty for protecting my future. Sometimes I still feel bad, like I was too harsh or inflexible, but then I remember I worked 4 years for that money, that nobody gave me anything, and that I have the right to decide what to do with what's mine. And that, I guess, is enough for now.